Okay, our next panelist is Eileen Hebets from the Department of Biology, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Okay, I want to start off by thanking Virgil and Todd for inviting me, thanking you all for staying awake, and if anybody wants to stand up and stretch, feel free, because I know it's been a long morning already. I also want to start off by saying I think I am maybe one of the most kind of on the edges of everybody at this conference, and this talk may be a bit of an outlier. And so I want to start off just by kind of telling you who I am and why I'm here. So I'm a biologist, an evolutionary biologist, animal behaviorist, and ever since I was little, I was fascinated by animals and fascinated by the diversity of forms and behavior across the animal kingdom. And one of the things that has always really struck me as I started to learn more about animals is their sensory systems. So I'm interested in their morphology, in their behavior, and in their sensory systems. And for example, animals that have really bizarre and unique sensory systems, like the echolocation capacity of bats. Or, I don't know if any of you know these animals, star-nosed moles. They have these incredible finger-like projections as their nose that have incredible tactile capacities. We have electromagnetic reception in the bills of the duck-billed platypus, and then just incredible olfactory capacities of moths. And so really, fundamentally, what I'm interested in is how morphology, behavior, and sensory systems all come together to influence diversification. And if you're interested in that, the place that you would start is by looking at animal communication. And that is what I do. I study animal communication and the evolution of animal communication. And one of the most important communication interactions that animals can have leads up to reproduction. And this is also when genes get transferred. And so not surprisingly, I focus on reproduction in animals. And more specifically, I focus on some of the incredible displays that evolve in courtship where individuals of one sex are trying to convince an individual of the other sex to mate with them. Okay, so I do this all within arachnids, and that may seem really odd, but I will explain to you why it's really not odd. So arachnids are arthropods. They're in the subphylum Chelicerata. What most people probably don't know is that they're incredibly diverse. So there are actually 11 living orders of arachnid. Most of us are familiar with spiders. That's only one of the 11 orders. Maybe you're familiar with scorpions, maybe ticks because you've had chiggers or you've had a tick, but maybe not many more than that. But if we look at the arachnids, just within this class, you see tremendous diversity in morphology, in lifestyle, in habitat, but you also see really unusual sensory systems. Like scorpions have these structures on the bottom of them called pectines that look like little combs that they drag along the substrate as they walk, and they can taste with them and they can feel with them. This group up in the upper left, sulfugids or camel spiders or sun scorpions, they have all sorts of common names. They have these specialized organs on the fourth pair of their walking legs called racket organs or malleoli that we actually don't really know how they function. We have incredible sensory systems of jumping spiders in these anterior median eyes, which have visual capacities similar to primates. So they have incredible image-forming eyes. And then some other orders that are near and dear to my heart. This is my favorite animal in the world. They're called amblypygids, and they have evolved these elongate antenniform legs. So they're walking legs, but they're no longer used for walking, and they're covered in sensory hairs. So what I'm really interested in is how and if some of these sensory systems are tied to communication and can lead to diversification. And so I'm interested in morphology, in behavior, and in sensory systems, and you may say, well, what kind of behavior can arachnids have? And so I just want to show you a couple of videos to show that they really do have quite complex, intriguing behavior. So this video is jumping spiders. They are tiny. These are only maybe 4 millimeters in body length. And this is a compilation of videos of multiple different species. These are all males doing courtship dances to females. And you can see that they have associated ornaments. They do these crazy displays. They lift up their abdomens that are brightly colored. They're just as extravagant as birds, but they're so tiny that you just have to look really close to appreciate it. And then this other video is a wolf spider genus that I work on. And in this one, you'll see that often these displays are coupled with songs. So this is a male that's drumming on the substrate. He's singing to a female. He has ornamented forelegs that he's also waving to females. So in my lab, I'm really driven, and my students are driven by natural history observations of sensory systems behavior in arachnids. And so we've worked on a lot of different groups, including the net casting or ogre-faced spiders, wolf spiders that I just showed you, the amblypygids. But the stories I'm going to tell you about today are two mating system stories. And what you wind up finding when you really dig into the behavioral literature of spiders is that there's some crazy behaviors out there and some crazy mating systems. And I think you will all agree with me when you hear these stories today. So the first one is about spontaneous death. And what you see here is this is a male dead hanging from the female's genital opening in a fishing spider. This fishing spider is Dolomedes tenebrosus. Turns out it's relatively common across North America. You can find it in Lincoln, Nebraska. And you find it by going out in these stream beds at night because they're nocturnal, and they're on the edges of the streams on root outcropping. So up here, Steve, who's the PhD student who worked on this system, is pointing out a couple individuals. They're quite common. They get really big. So these are the spiders that people are really afraid of because the females can be about that big with leg span. So they come out at night, and it turns out that males die when they mate with females. So I'm going to show you a video of what this looks like. So this is the male moving on top of a female who's hanging on a strand of silk. He's going back and forth, and right there, his legs curl up. And you're going to see the same thing in slow motion. So he's going back and forth. He's kind of checking out her genital opening. And as soon as he inserts his pedipalp, which is where he carries his sperm, and inflates his hematodocal sac right there, his legs curl up, and he just hangs there. And it turns out, after lots and lots of observations, that all these males die. So we actually counted the heartbeat and looked at how long it took males to die, and within 240 minutes, every male dies. Now, is this the case for all males? Yes, all males always die. We have done well over 200 pairings every time a male dies. So these males have two of these appendages that they carry their sperm around in. So they produce their sperm in their reproductive organs, they ejaculate it onto a sperm web, and they turn around and they pick it up in these front appendages. And this is what they use to transfer sperm. Males have sperm in both of these, we've checked, but as soon as they insert one, they curl up and they die, 100% of the time. It's not a Nebraska thing. We thought maybe it was a Nebraska thing. Maybe there's something really weird about our population. We've traveled all over the country, collected these. In this particular species, all males always die the very first time they transfer sperm to a female. And what is curious is that this kind of white bulb here is what's called the hematodocal sac. So it's coiled up inside the male's palp, but when he inserts sperm, he pushes his fluid into, we think, he pushes his fluid into that palp. It causes that to expand, and with pressure through a little opening in a duct, that's how the sperm gets transferred to the female. In most spiders, that sac expands and it goes back down. And then he'll insert again, and it expands and goes back down. Sometimes they trade off. They do it with their right one and then their left. In these males, it expands and it never goes back down, and they just hang from the female's epigynum, which is her genital opening. Okay, so it's this evolutionary riddle, right? How can you get a species where all males die as soon as they mate? So it turns out that all females always cannibalize the males. So 100% of the time, the males hang from the female's opening, and within 15 minutes, she doesn't do it right away always, but within 15 minutes, she eventually plucks the male from her opening and consumes her. So this is a species in which there's large size dimorphism. So females are quite a bit larger than males are. So is eating a male beneficial at all? So there's been a lot of research in a lot of different systems, mostly spider systems and praying mantis systems, that have asked this question, are there benefits for males sacrificing their body to females in terms of providing her nutrients that she could then put towards eggs? A lot of the research prior to this has said no, because you often see this in these really dimorphic species where females are so big and males are so small that their bodies are really not worth anything in terms of nutrients, and it really doesn't provide any kind of a benefit. But we looked at it anyway, and what we did is we mated females and then pulled the male away and either gave the female back to the female so she could eat them, or we size matched a cricket, so we weighed crickets to match the male, we gave the female a cricket, or we gave the female nothing. And then we looked at how many offspring the female produced, how big the offspring were, and how well they survived. And it turns out that if a female ate a male, she produced more offspring. If she ate a male, her offspring were heavier, and if she ate a male, her offspring survived for longer. So it looks like there's some benefit specifically to eating these males at this particular point in time. So if we look at kind of self-sacrifice behavior, or they call it terminal investment strategies of males, it's not uncommon in spiders. Many of you may have heard of the black widow or the redback spider, where the males will actively roll their abdomens into the female's mouth, and she starts eating him while he's transferring sperm. And in that system, while she's doing that, he's able to transfer more sperm, and she's less likely to remate. But in that system, males are unlikely to find future females. And so they've argued that it's adaptive for males to sacrifice themselves, and not all males get eaten all the time. Not all of them do this somersault behavior. So up to this point, all of this behavior has been found in the orb-weaving spiders, but this example for us is in the fishing spider. So it's the first group well outside of these other spider systems where we see this same type of behavior evolve. So because all males die all the time, it's really hard to study because there's no variation. And so we've started to look at closely related species. So this is another one found in Lincoln, Nebraska, Dolomedes scriptus, found in the same habitat. And an undergrad in my lab is starting to quantify their mating system. And so we're looking at how frequently cannibalism is, how many times males use their palps to insert to females, and we're looking at sperm transfer. And so this would, oh, the video is working. Great. So this is what that sac opening looks like. And what we're doing is we're comparing the size of this hematodocal sac across species, because we actually think that death is potentially a byproduct of sperm transfer. And we think that sperm competition might be driving spontaneous death in this particular system. So we're also collaborating with Peter Michalik in Germany to do some micro-CT scans where we can actually look at the palps and quantify the size of these hepatodocal sacs across species, as well as dissecting out the testes and looking at testes size to look at sperm production, as well as dissecting out palps and looking at sperm transfer. So there's a lot of ongoing work right now, and I'm sure people have lots of questions about this system, and so I won't tell you more, and we'll kind of wait for questions. But in this particular system, we see that males sacrifice their body, and they appear to sacrifice their body for the benefit of their offspring. So they produce more, heavier, and offspring that are longer lived. Okay, so now I want to tell you a different story, and this is with another fishing spider, but it's in a different genus. This is called a nursery web spider, Piscirina mira, and this is work done by my recently graduated PhD student, Alyssa Anderson. They're also found in Lincoln, Nebraska. They're probably, they are definitely much more widespread as well. They're also nocturnal. They're easiest to find out at night. And these males actually tie the females up with silk before they mate with them. So I'm going to show you a video of that. So the female is upside down on this popsicle stick. The male is approaching, and right there, he's moving around, and he's actually laying silk, and he's tying her legs up. And you can see that she's pretty passive in this. So the first time males approach females, if she's going to be receptive, she doesn't fight this tying up behavior. What this winds up looking like is that. So the female is on the right, and you can see silk all over her legs. She's completely tied up. And while the female is tied up, the male mates with her. And so again, males use these palps, the pedipalps that they expand to put into their sperm into the female's epigyne. So it turns out that by wrapping the females up with silk, these males get more pedipalp insertions. So instead of just using that one palp, they're able to use both, and they avoid being eaten. So the way we were able to tell that is we very cleverly took some dental resin and put it over the spinnerets of the male so that he actually could not produce silk. And then we paired males with females, and we looked at compared males that could and could not wrap in terms of how many of them were eaten and how many of them got 2 versus 1 insertion. So if you look at the data, if a male cannot wrap a female, over 60% of them got eaten by these females. And if they can wrap a female, over 60% got 2 of these pedipalpal insertions. So there's an obvious benefit, as we have all talked about, to living. So we can understand the benefit of not being cannibalized, but what about these 2 pedipalpal insertions? Is there any benefit to this? So we took a look at this a little bit closer and actually paired females with, or allowed females to get 1 versus 2 insertions. And what we found is that insertion number leads to more sperm transferred and higher fertilization success. And so what that looks like is we would dissect both pedipalps of males. We first ensured that both palps had approximately the same number of sperm, and then allowed a male to get 1 mating or allowed a male to get 2 matings, and then looked at how much sperm was in one or both of the palps. And so when we look at the total amount of sperm in a male that got 0 matings, so this is a virgin male, he has a lot of sperm, compared to males that got 1 versus males that got 2. So males are clearly transferring more sperm when they get 2 insertions, and when they get 2 insertions, the total offspring number is significantly higher, specifically 25% higher when they get 2 insertions. So, okay, in this species, males are avoiding cannibalism by wrapping females up. So why do we have, in one species, males evolving a strategy to avoid being eaten, and in another species, males seemingly evolving a strategy that spontaneously kills them so that the females can eat them? And in this particular species where males tie up females, we hypothesize that if males survive, they can go on to mate more, and they can increase their fitness by future matings. And so we paired males with multiple virgin females, up to 5 across a series of 9 days, and we looked at how many males would mate multiply. And it turns out that a lot of males mate multiply, so the highest proportion mated with 3 males over those 5, or 3 females over those 5 females they were paired with, but there were some males that mated with all 5 females. So males clearly can mate with more females, but what we really want to know is if they're increasing their fitness by mating with these additional females. And when we look at the number of matings and total offspring across females, we see that indeed there is a positive relationship. So more matings for a male does lead to more offspring in this particular species. Okay, so this is all done in the laboratory. We're pairing males and females together. What is actually happening in the field, and are males actually able to encounter females in the field? Our density is high enough that males are likely to encounter females in the field. So we did a mark recapture study over a series of a month and a half where we had quadrats set out and marked individuals and went back and monitored them. We looked at the density of adult males, females, and juveniles, the sex ratios throughout the season, and then did focal observations of individual males and females and looked at a distance that they might travel in the field. So using all of these data, we produced a model that used the natural demographic data to predict how many females a male in the field is likely to encounter We already know that if they encounter them, they can mate, and if they mate more, they get more offspring. And it turns out that it's different for early in the season versus late in the season, but early in the season, males encounter approximately 7 females, and that is about doubled late in the season. So these males that have evolved this strategy of tying up females so that they don't get cannibalized and so that they can get more matings are increasing their likelihood of getting future matings, and by getting 2 insertions, increasing their offspring number. So we have these 2 very different strategies in these fishing spider systems, where one is facilitating death and one is avoiding death. And I think I'm going to leave it there and try and get some discussion going about how and why you might see these different strategies in spiders that are living in very similar environments and presumably under very similar, at least, environmental ecological selection. Thanks.
Really cool talk. Really enjoyed all the videos. Thank you. What about intrasexual competition between the males, other than the availability of females? Could that be something like a plug, operating as a plug for sperm competition?
Right, so we've looked at that, and we've actually introduced, so as a male mates with a female in this system where his body is hanging, we've introduced a second male at various time points, including a time point when the initial male's body was still hanging. And it does not, in 1 out of like over 100 cases, did the male's physical body prevent a second male from mating. So it does not look like that's at least the predominant way in which this is functioning. It doesn't appear to be a mating plug. But it's a great question, because in a lot of the orb weavers, you actually see males inserting this pedipalp into females, and then they actually break off pieces of their pedipalp that stay in the female's epigenome and block a second male from mating. But we do not see that in this system.
So it looks like there's a lot more sexual dimorphism in the first one than the second one.
Yes.
So do you have any ideas which came first, the difference in mating strategies or the difference in dimorphism?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So when you see these terminal investment strategies, it's frequently, almost always, associated with extreme sexual size dimorphism. And so you see huge differences between female size and male size. Always females are larger, at least in the spider systems. And you see early male maturation. And you see these terminal investment strategies. So there's these, we think of them as kind of these 3 pillars that are almost always present, and there have been some phylogenetic analyses that have looked at this and certainly shown that there are evolutionary correlations, but they're so tightly correlated that it's impossible to figure out what the cause and consequence is. But in some mathematical modeling that has been done, the only thing that predicts these male investment strategies is differential sex ratio early in the season. And so males maturing earlier and being around earlier in the season, and that is also coincidental with typically smaller males, because they're maturing earlier, they're not growing for as long. And so when males mature earlier in the season, they tend to be smaller, and that is a good predictor of whether or not they use a terminal investment strategy. And so we actually have data on that first system to show that males mature about 3 weeks before females in the field, and then you can imagine that their numbers just literally die off because they're dying as they're mating. But in that second system, males and females are maturing almost exactly at the same time, and they are very similarly sized. So that is certainly playing a role. Yeah.
I understand you say that you mark them and come back later and find the same spiders?
Yep.
How far do they roam? It looked like they only were roaming a few centimeters.
Yeah, well, so they'll move several meters. And this is over, a month and a half, and right during the breeding season. And so during the breeding season, they can be pretty densely packed in these forest environments. And so males are probably kind of not having to go all that far to find females. Earlier in the season, like throughout their life, they may be traveling farther than that, but we actually have very little understanding, unlike a lot of other animals, very little understanding of the ranges or the distance over which spiders move. There have been some genetic studies looking at close populations showing that it actually does not look like they move very far. At least, so another way that spiders can move though when they're very little is they balloon. So they produce a little piece of silk and they get carried away by the wind. And we know that those spiders can, move hundreds of kilometers. But for these wolf spiders, they actually, and fishing spiders, they tend to stay closer to home. But they're not, over that time period, they're not moving all that far.
So if you mark 100 spiders, how many of them do you find a week later or 2 weeks later?
No, I would not be able to give you those numbers off the top of my head, but it's not huge numbers. It's less than 50%.
And how long did it take the spider to get out of her web?
So it's a great question. So interestingly, what winds up happening is the female, the first time a male approaches, and if she's a virgin, she seems to participate in pulling her legs up and allowing the male to wrap. As soon as he inserts that first time, she starts struggling. And that's where the tying up actually helps the male get the second one, because if she's not tied up, she'll break away right there and go after him. So the females, once they start to try to get out, they can actually do it quite quickly. And that's when males get picked off, is after.
Will she pick up a random one?
So we did the feeding experiment with that second species as well. And if you present a female with another male, she will eat him too. Yeah.
And what the nutritional value of the male, as you said, is rather small and not obviously greater than the cricket. So what do you think's what's leading to increased investment in the offspring? Could it actually be some maternal choice about how much to invest once she knows something about the genes of the father?
It certainly could be. So everything right now is on the table. It could be some female differential investment by females. It could be something that males are turning on, something associated with death where they're upregulating something that maybe is providing some benefit to females. And so the way that reproduction works in spiders is that females start yolking their eggs when they're mature, but they don't finish the yolking until they've mated. And so there's certainly time for both additional resources to be put in the eggs if males are kicking something on and producing it, or for females to make a choice at that point to invest more or less in eggs.
With the second species, with the wolf spiders, did you find that same difference in depending on whether she ate?
Yes, the exact same data. Yep.
So we have time for 2 more questions. I know Randy had a question, and then someone in the back.
That sort of gets at mine. I was just interested in how do you think female choice is working in especially the self-sacrificial arthropods such as spiders and so forth?
Yeah, so from a female's point of view, what we don't know anything about is sperm priority precedence and whether females have any control over that. We're actually doing some paternity analyses in the second species, in the nursery web spider, to look at paternity and sperm precedence patterns. But one way in which female choice could function is if females are actively manipulating the sperm in any way. It's clearly beneficial for the first species, for both species, for the females to eat the males. The females are getting a benefit for sure. And so you tend to not see females reject approaching males like you do in a lot of other spider systems. And that may be because they're getting a benefit if they can eat them, and they may have some means afterwards of actually
Selecting.
Right, exactly.
How many times do they mate?
They can mate multiple times. In the field, we have no idea. In the lab, they will mate multiply.
I meant with different males.
Right, and they will in the lab. In the field, we actually have egg sac data from the field so that we'll do our paternity analyses will be done on known matings in the lab to look at priority patterns, but on egg sacs from the field to get an idea of how many males females are actually mating with.
For the dark fishing spider, so you mentioned how they have 2 sacs, but they only ever really insert once. Do they, are there ever instances in which they're, so to speak, unsuccessful? So maybe they think they've inserted and then have released, but they didn't actually, and do they still die, or do they then use the second sac?
It's a great question, and they die.
Bummer.
So, yeah, it has happened inadvertently when we're transferring a male to another vial or something, and we use cotton wicks for moisture, and there was a male who got his palp stuck on the wick, and it pulled the sac out, and he curled up and died. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Eileen Hebets. Thank you very much.